Good morning, students. Hope you are doing well at your home and we are very happy to see your support. Let's study further. Up to this chapter, we will study about the pollen grain formation, means the production of male gametophyte, and then we studied the structure and development of female gametophyte. Now we will start the next topic of this chapter, that is pollination. What is pollination? As you all know, pollination is the process of transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma. The process of transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma is called pollination. In the pollination, we divide this process into two types. One is self-pollination and second is cross-pollination. Self-pollination. Self-pollination is the process in which pollen grains of the same flowers are transferred to the stigma of the same flower. And that process can also be divided into the two types. Let's see what are these. The pollination, self-pollination can be divided into these two types. First one is autogamy and second one is geitonogamy. These two types can be explained further. Autogamy. Autogamy means the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of the same flower. Means transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of same flower. Here the anther is of the same flower and stigma as well of the same flower. Such type of pollination is known as autogamy. And the second type, that is geitonogamy, the transfer of pollen grains is done by the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower, but plant is same. So it's the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of different flower, but plant is same. So what's the difference between both of these two processes? In autogamy, flower is same. Pollen grains from the same flower reach to the stigma of the same flower. But in the geitonogamy, the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of the one flower is done at the stigma of the another flower, but plant remains same. This is known as self-pollination. These are the two types of self-pollination. Next type of pollination is known as cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is the pollination in which transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is done by some pollinating agents, and it is the transfer of pollen grains from one flower to the another flower of different plants. So here the plants are also different, flowers are also different, and this cross-pollination is also known as xenogamy and allogamy. These are some technical terms which we use for referring the cross-pollination. Xenogamy or allogamy is the transfer of pollen grains from one flower to another in different plants. So these are the types of cross-pollination. Now let's see what are the advantages and disadvantages of such type of pollination. In the case of self-pollination, we are saying that transfer of pollen grains from one plant to is done from one flower to the same flower, or from one flower to the another flower of the same plant. In such type of pollination, in the case of self-pollination, the chances of pollination is 100%. Here, the chances of pollination is much more than in the case of cross-pollination. Here, chances is increased because pollen grains and stigma, both of these two lie together. They are very near each other. So the chances increases, and within the one flower, this process is done. So it gives the assured pollination process. In the case of genogamy, the chances is also increased because the flowers are at the same plant. But there is one disadvantage also. In the case of self-pollination, we are saying the transfer of pollen grains from one flower to another in the same or in the different. It means in the self-pollination, transfer of pollen grains is done on the stigma of the same flower or the stigma of another flower of the same plant. So in the case, there is no mixing of gene pools. There is no chances to come any new types of genetic variations, because genetically both of these two cases, these two cases of pollination, plants are similar. Here the flower is same and here the plant is the same. So there is no chances of recombinant crossing over, etc. So no new variations are created and same type of gene pools is formed again and again. And such type of pollination create a problem that is known as inbreeding depression. This is known as inbreeding depression. So, but in the case of cross-pollination, plants are acquired such type of mechanism in which the pollen grains reaches to the another plant. So, chances of genetic variations increase. Improved varieties of plants can be formed. New genes can be immersed into the one plants, and it provides very well-developed plant in the case of genetic material. But here, pollinating agents are required which can transfer the pollen grains from one flower to another flower at different plants. But as well, we discussed the advantages and disadvantages in both cases, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Cross-pollination has its own advantages and disadvantages, as well as self-pollination also has its advantages and disadvantages. So in the case self-pollination, now we will discuss about how plants adapt themselves for the self-pollination. How plants adapt themselves for the self-pollination. For the self-pollination, plants adopt some different techniques or different adaptations. First one is homogamy. Homogamy. Homogamy means development of both sex organs at the same time. Development of both sex organs at same time. Means when the anthers will develop and the dices to release the pollen grains, at that time the stigma of the same flower is also receptible, and it can take the pollen grains, it can receive the pollen grains for the process of pollination. Such type of process is known as homogamy. Both sex organs, male and female, both we can write male as well as female, both sex organs develops at the same time so that they can assure the 100% chances of pollination. Second adaptation that is forms is the development of Cleistogamous flowers. Cleistogamous flowers we can say Cleistogamy, and the Cleistogamy is the term which is used for the formation of Cleistogamous flowers. Cleistogamy means the formation of closed flower. Formation of closed flower. Such type of plants which forms Cleistogamous flowers in which the flowers remain closed, so that chances of self-pollination can be increased. Or here the chances of self-pollination is 100% because no other pollen grains can reach to the stigma of that flower, or pollen grains cannot released out from the flower. So chances is 100%. Such type of flowers are known as closed flower. Let's see how it happens. In the case of cleistogamous flower, like if we draw the stigma, here the stigma of the flower is present. Here it forms pollen grains. Anther, inside the pollen grains are formed. And these flowers always remain closed. Means in the birth stage they do not comes out from their birth stage. They always remain in the closed position. This is the thalamus. Stigma is present, pistil is present at the thalamus and it has stigma. These are the anthers in which pollen grains are formed and filaments are arranged also joined with the thalamus. And these flowers always remain in the closed position. Such type of flowers are known as cleistogamous flowers. Some plants formed two types of flowers. One, that is the normal type of flower that is known as Chelsogamous flowers, as well as they form Cleistogamous of flower. Some plants form two types of flowers. Chelsogamous flowers as well as Cleistogamous flower, in which Chasmogamous flowers are Chasmogamous are open type. These are the closed type. Cleistogamous are closed type and Chasmogamous are open type flower, in which the anthers and stigma both are exposed. Some plants formed both type of flowers, cleistogamous as well as chasmogamous flowers, in which these chasmogamous flowers are responsible for the cross pollination. They are for cross pollination, but cleistogamous flowers assure the self pollination. The example of such type of the plants in which both types of the flowers are formed are examples: oxalis, viola, and commelina. Oxalis, viola, and commelina. These are the example of the plants which forms both type of flowers. Cleistogamous flower as well as chasmogamous flowers. Cleistogamous flowers are the flowers which remain in the closed condition, and the chasmogamous flowers which are the open flower. Both type of these flowers are formed for the different type of pollination. They support cleistogamous flowers support self-pollination and chasmogamous flowers support cross-pollination. These are the some adaptation by which the plants assure themselves for the self-pollination. Now we will discuss about the cross-pollination. How the cross-pollination is done in the case of plants. For the cross-pollination, as we discussed earlier, some pollinating agents is required. This is the process in which the anther of the one flower is transferred to the stigma of the another flower of different plants. So here the plants are also different. For this process, the plants require some agents by which the pollen grains of one flower can be transferred to the stigma of another flower of different plant. Such type of agents are known as pollinating agents. Pollinating agents. Or we can use the word pollinating agencies also. Pollinating agents. What could be the pollinating agents? First, this pollination can be done by air or by water. It can be done by insects, or it can be done by birds, or it can be done by animals. These are the some pollinating agents by which plants do their cross-pollination process. When air is used as a pollinating agent, such type of pollination is known as anemophily. Anemophily. When air is used as a medium of pollination, as a medium of transfer of pollen grains from one plant to the stigma of another plant of the flower of the different plant. When air is used as a medium, such type of pollination is known as anemophily. When water is used as a medium, then we use the word that is the hydrophily. In the case of insects, the word used is entomophily. And when birds are used, then it is known as ornithophily. And when the pollination is done with the help of animals, then it is known as zoophily. These are the terms when according to the pollinating agents which are required. If pollinating agent is air, then pollination is known as anemophily. When water is as a pollinating agent is used, then the term is hydrophily. When insects are used as a pollinating agent, then it is known as entomophily. When birds are used as pollinating agent, then it is known as ornithophily. And when animals are used as a pollinating agent, then we use the term that is zoophily. These are the some pollinating agents by which plants do their cross pollination. Now, in the next portion of the video, we will discuss about the some adaptation by which plants assure their cross pollination process.